Deafrowe with Deafrowe Closed Caption, and I'm back again with another review. And this time it's episode 5 of The Devil's Hour, called The Half of Ourselves We Have Lost. Before I get started though, please like, subscribe, and share. Hit that notification bell so you can see the very last episode I do of this show after this one. That's going to be coming up in a couple days after this video has released. Now let's get started on the half of ourselves we have lost of The Devil's Hour, episode 5. As you can see here, we are introduced to a new character named Connor right here in the beginning of the episode. And he's one of Gideon's, I guess you could say, projects. Because Gideon explains to everybody, or he tries to explain to everybody, that he doesn't really want to kill anyone. And he goes out of his way to not let that happen. And here's an example of it. Connor, he knows Connor is going to commit a crime, which means he's probably going to end up murdering someone innocent. And so he kidnapped Connor and is trying to recondition him, I guess you could say, or condition him in a way that he won't murder. And that's how this episode starts. And then, of course, we move on to Detective Ravi having to be there with Detective... Let's see, was it Detective Holness? Yep. As you saw in the last episode, at the very beginning of the episode, you were actually seeing the end of the episode, where the 17-year-old Aiden is the one that ended up killing Detective Nick Holness and his wife in their own home with that very knife that he was showing that gangster. So, now you see why Gideon was so adamant about going after Aiden, because he knew this was going to happen, and he told Detective Ravi that because you and Lucy Chambers got in my way, there is going to be consequences, but not from me. It's just consequences from me not taking action like I wanted to. And sure enough, even though Aiden killed these two, they're saying in this little line here that he tried to kill himself afterwards, like he felt so guilty about doing it, he overdosed and tried to kill himself. So, yeah. And DS Ravi, he goes in, DA Ravi, whatever we're going to call it, Detective, it's DI, my bad. DI Ravi goes in there and he thinks he can muster it out. He puts his earphones in, thinking he can, this is his best friend, his partner that he, just got real close with, and all of a sudden he's gone, and he realizes he can't take it. It just like crashes here. So then we cut to Lucy Chambers and Isaac, and of course Lucy's mom. They're at the nursing home area packing up and putting her in somewhere else, which is 24/7 care, because apparently her mom cannot be trusted just to wander off. Can't trust her not to wander off anymore. And the grandmother's talking to Isaac. She's like, "You can see the birds too, can't you?" And Isaac just shakes his head, yes. I say, well, they're not really there. Even though you can see them and hear them and everything, doesn't mean they're really there. And she understands what Isaac's going through, because the grandmother can see it too. So the grandmother gives him the knob from that gun cabinet and says, look, if you need your way back, this is what you need to keep in your hands as your way back. And so he takes the knob. Grandmother gives him the knob from that gun cabinet. It's like, this is real, this is your way back, or whatever. And the grandmother basically just tells him, like, I'm too far gone as it is. And so at least I can do is help you. So, yeah, so they're leaving from that area. And they're back at the psychiatrist, and, old Mike decides to show, and Mike is getting increasingly aggressive towards his son, because he's frustrated because the son is what tore him and Lucy apart and all this other stuff. and the son went away for a little bit, and now came back, and now he's trying to do his part as best he can, even though he doesn't have the patience for it, obviously, and he just thinks his son's a psycho. And the son is starting to, in this episode, Isaac is starting to show like little hints there, here and there of personality and whatnot, and they can't quite figure out what's going on with him, like what's causing these actions and interactions. And so, and kind of like the whole ordeal with the Lucy sees that he has the knob in his hand. He's like, "Where'd you get that from?" And he's like, "Grandmother gave it to me." He's like, "Well, that's not yours. She didn't give that to you." And like Isaac argues, like, "No, she gave this to me," and it just pitches a fit, which is, he never pitches a fit. And Isaac knows the importance of having something grounded so he doesn't lose himself again and get accidentally pushed over into the other timeline like he was before. And then this part is, this, and like I said, Lucy is starting to see a lot more too. She's starting to see memories of another timeline and herself being in that timeline. Every now and again, she'll have her, like, anytime she's like around Ravi or something, like, she'll remember her and Ravi somewhere else as a couple or something, but it never happened in this timeline. And at first, when you see it, you think it's maybe their future in this timeline, when actually it's a whole nother timeline altogether. So they're going down the road right here, and all of a sudden, the little Warren girl jumps out in front of the car and races off towards another house. So she knocks on the door, like, "Hey, your kid, ran out into the road again." She's like, "Really?" "Well, the kid was in the house." Well, that's when she gets back in the car, and she's like, "You saw that too, didn't you, Isaac?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So they saw the other timeline of that girl running towards their house as if it was her house, which was house number 7, which the house they are in this timeline with Lucy and Isaac is house number 14. So they get to the house, and D.I. Ravi is sitting there on the doorstep, and he's like, there's too many things going on. It's just all weird, and he's talking to her about all this stuff, how Aiden killed his, partner and everything, and she's like, "Well, I gotta help you now. I'm having these memories. I think I can track this guy down or whatever." And that's when she starts to, the more she thinks about a certain person, and see, in this little bit right here, she sees D.I. Ravi basically beat the shit. That's going to be like a future version of himself that she sees, and like she's catching snippets of it, and like it's almost like deja vu, but it's not really. She's like, and it's not psychic either, because she can't predict the future. She can only see it from another timeline or one that's been lived before, which she has. So then she goes to bed that night, and this is what she dreams of. Farther into the future, and this is not really the future of this timeline, this is the future of a different timeline, where she figures out real late in the game who Gideon is, and goes and visits him. And apparently he's very old, and he's dying in the prison. And you look at her, and she's obviously got some type of cancer of some sort. That she doesn't have any hair, her eyebrows are gone, all that sort of deal. And she's there to talk to Gideon because she figured out who he is. And basically they're just talking, because at this point in the game, I think because of the chemo and all this stuff in this other timeline, she has started to see other memories of herself. So then she wakes up from that dream, and she immediately figures, she knows the name Gideon Shepherd, because that future self memory is talking to him. And she immediately looks him up and realizes like a 9-year-old boy that disappeared in like 1967 after killing his father. Basically killed his father and disappeared. Uh, and then like Di's Ravi's like, what makes you think it's him? Well, we know I know where his brother is. We could go talk to his brother. And so the next day they take off or whatever. Like I said again, whenever she's with Di Ravi or whatever, she starts having memories of his of a relationship with him that didn't happen in this timeline. It happened in another timeline. And she like sees a ring on her finger all of a sudden when it ain't there. And then it cuts to a scene where she's getting ready for a wedding that she didn't go to, and she's a smoker. Whereas this timeline, she's not a smoker. She just picked it up. Whereas in the timeline where she's getting married to Ravi or whatever, she's a smoker, which would make more sense if that's the timeline she had a dream about towards the future. If she had some type of lung cancer or whatever, and that's it's like, what can I do to change this? Anyway, we get to the brother, which is Malcolm Shepard. He's out there basically trying to teach his kid how to drive a car. And they pull up and they like, hey, let's talk about what's going on here with your brother. Have you heard from him and all this other stuff? And he basically just, says he calls once a year on my birthday and leaves a message at 1:32 something in the morning sometimes because he knows I'm not going to answer it. And so they listen to one of these messages and they kind of figure out where he's leaving, like from the background noise. They're trying to get an idea of where he is, and then finally, at some point, before I get to that, get this part here where, since she's out with Di Ravi trying to help him solve this investigation or whatever, she sends Mike, the dad of Isaac, to go pick him up from school. And he has this weird conversation. Like, you can tell he's holding back all these, bad thoughts about Isaac because he just doesn't seem like that type person that can handle a child that has a lot of issues, considering because he probably considers himself to be damn near perfect. Like, how can something like this come from me, basically? And that's probably his train of thought, to be honest with you. And so he has this weird conversation with the teachers, like, yeah, he's probably going to wake up. He's probably going to kill me in my sleep one day. And she's like, what? Okay, no, sorry, that's a bad joke. And, of course, he leaves with her, leaves with him. And so they're back. She drops him off. She goes back home, whatever. And Isaac's just kind of sitting there watching the game with his dad. Well, his dad's watching the game. He's just kind of sitting there like, what am I supposed to do? And so they, clowning around. They have another conversation where it's like, blah, blah, blah. He's like, hey, pretend I gave you strawberry ice cream, even though he didn't. Mike's doing some weird things, and I don't quite understand. It's like he's a magnet for bad emotions. And since nothing bounces off Isaac and nothing, or Isaac doesn't absorb it, it just escalates. He can't throw the energy at him. And so they're in bed. She wakes up at 3:33, of course, because that was our. All right, let's see. And then he's talking to his supervisor or whatever. Supervisor's like, hey, it's a long shot this guy has anything to do with anything. And then like Ravi's like, it's a win-win if he's not the guy. If he's not the guy, then we caught somebody that's been missing since 1967 for a murder he committed when he was 9. If it is the guy, then we stopped all these other murders and we caught the guy that murdered. So it's like a win-win. So what's the problem? And then the supervisor gives him shit and like leave it, whatever. And then, of course, we cut to Lucy. Like, she left her bed and goes to sleep in Isaac's bed. And Isaac is actually showing some type of affection towards her now. and it's all stemmed from that little, that happening of him going into that other timeline and all that kind of stuff. So finally, he's like, I want to do what I want to do, blah blah blah, leaves. So then Lucy calls him and realizes where she hears that sound. It's like an abandoned repair yard, and it's real close to a train tracks. And so she's like, I used to live near the area like that, so that's got to be where he is. So D.I. Ravi, he gets the idea. He's like, well, I'm just gonna go out there. And they cut to another memory of hers. As she's in the car, she sees that ring on her finger again, and she has this memory. And this memory is her getting married to Ravi. And the way they set this scene up, it's almost like this is happening in the future of this timeline. But then, if you look real close here, let's see if I can get it. If I get it right here, I'm going to pause it right here. As you can see, in this timeline, they are still alive. So this is why this is not this timeline that we're seeing. Even though they set the scene to seem like it was something that's going to happen in Ravi and Lucy Chambers' future, it's not. It's a whole nother timeline that you're seeing. And that's when Lucy realizes the memory is not of something that's happening right now. So there you go. So Ravi shows up at the abandoned place that Lucy figured, and he sees his car covered up or whatever. Gets inside, sees all these pictures of Isaac and stuff, and what's going on here. I was like, okay, something's going on. He finds Connor, which we saw at the very beginning of the episode, the one that he's trying to condition, sitting in front of a TV, strapped to a chair with rotten meat stinking around him. So he unties Connor and lets him go. Connor gets outside, and before Connor can make it anywhere, Gideon shoots him in the back. Let's see if yeah. So he's going. And right about in here, you see Gideon come out the window, and boom. So Gideon kills him. He doesn't want him to murder the person he don't want him to murder. So apparently, by Gideon murdering him, he prevents Connor from committing a murder of an innocent. And that's the reason Gideon does these murders. It's not because he's out for vengeance or anything like that. He's doing it to create a timeline where there's less innocents being killed. And he said, but even though he tries, the people might, at the time of him killing them, might be innocent altogether, but he knows the timeline. He knows what's going to happen. So Ravi tries to track him down in the store. Gideon gets the upper hand, and Gideon's like, look, I've never killed you in any timeline. Don't stop following me and stop trying to capture me. I've never killed you in a timeline. You're a good person. I know you are. Leave me alone. Whatever. And he beats the shit out of because every time you could tell every time Ravi was going to take a punch or something like that at Gideon, he knew which way to move. It's like he'd been in that situation before with Ravi and knew exactly what kind of fighting style he was going to use on him. And so he beats the shit out of Ravi, leaves him, gets in the car, tries to make a getaway right here. And that's when Lucy shows up and just, T-bones his ass and knocks him out in the car. Calls the ambulance. And of course, they're back. She's back at home. They're going to eat with Mike or whatever. And Ravi calls her up. She's like, "Look, we have Gideon Shepherd here in the interrogation room, but he is refusing to talk to anybody unless you're here." And so at this point, she has to go back and talk to Gideon. And that's when this is where it finally catches up with all those flash forwards that we saw before throughout the whole season. We're caught up to that point now. We're at the flash forward point, and we're talking to Gideon now, and he's about to spill the beans pretty much. He tries to tell her, it's like, have you ever felt like you had deja vu, but you knew better, like you knew something was really up. It really wasn't deja vu or whatever. And then, it cuts to Mike being frustrated again with his food and dumping it out in the trash can and yelling at Isaac. For some reason, they got to show you that. We know he's an asshole. I don't know why. Come on. Anyway, so it basically says you blame me because that's easier than blaming yourself. And he's talking about Detective Halson. And he says, Holness, my bad, Detective Holness, because Ravi tries to blame him for Detective Holness's, murder, when Ashley's like, look, you got in my way. I could have taken Aiden out, and Nick Holness, Detective Holness, would have never died. Now, I didn't know Holness personally, but I know he was a good person. He never hurt anybody. And so that's why he's saying, it's like, if you hadn't stopped me, he would be still alive right now. And then they try to get to him a little bit by saying, did you know we talked to Malcolm, your brother? He's like, leave Malcolm out of this. He has nothing to do with this. I haven't seen him since I was 9 years old. All this other stuff. He's like, well, why did you murder your dad and leave your mother and your brother? So I didn't murder my dad. He murdered me. Or he says he basically Gideon says, Malcolm has nothing to do with this. And the reason I murdered my father is because he murdered me first. And they looked at him like, what do you mean murder you first? And then he looks over at D.I. Ravi and says, you might want to turn that recorder on. You want to catch all this. And then that's when the episode ends. You might want to turn that recorder on and catch the rest of this. And it's almost time for that last episode 6. So, that's my review of this episode 5, entitled The Half of Ourselves We Have Lost. Coming up to the last episode of The Devil's Hour is going to be up next. If you like what I've been doing with these reviews of these episodes of The Devil's Hour, and you can't wait for season 2 and 3, from what I heard, because they approved it for 2 more seasons. I can't wait to see where this goes, by the way. All these timelines and him memorizing the timeline he was in before and that kind of deal. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, season 6 kind of shows you the history of Gideon Shepherd. So you don't want to miss this next review, because it is showing you how Gideon Shepherd became Gideon Shepherd. So, without further ado, that's my review of episode 5, The Half of Ourselves We Have Lost. And that is Deafrowe. Well, wait a minute. I'll catch you out on the edge of another review. Deafrowe out.